Introducing my Stormburst Lightning Conduit Trickster build guide. This was my league start for Lake of Kalandra or PoE 3.19, and thankfully it is able to get to red maps on only a 4 link. Hello Exile, you're watching Altec 2K Gaming. First let's talk about the cost. This build functions very well off minimal currency, thanks to the great defences offered by the Trickster Ascendancy. At the minimum currency level, which is basically anything you can pick up or craft with essences, this build functions very well, able to kill the Blackstar boss on only a 4 link. That said, it wasn't a particularly pleasant fight and lasted an awfully long time, however we didn't die, which was good. Once we do have some currency, there is plenty to sink into this build. I currently have the build running at 11 Divines, and it can go way higher than that as we start to min and max it. Now my goal for this character was to create a build that was really tanky based on the new Trickster Ascendancy. So without further ado, let's get into it. Defences. This build is by far the tankiest build I've ever developed or played. Its defensive lineup features the following: Ghost Shroud, Chaos Immunity, percentage of incoming damage converted to Elemental or Chaos damage, 70% evasion rating, Endurance charges, 33% spell block, 26% attack block, 100% spell suppression with 60% mitigation, 10% of life, mana and energy shield restored on kill, shock, freeze and chill immunity, energy shield leech, full level steel skin, 95% stun avoidance, 50% chance to ignore stuns, sigil of power and infused channeling damage reduction. All of this adds up to us not getting hit very often and the build feeling stupidly safe. That said, there are a few things that do bother this build still, one of which is damage over time, and the other one is big physical slams. If these get through our defences and our hit points, we will die. Therefore we are far from invincible, and as such I wouldn't recommend this guide for hardcore. Moving on now to the offences. This build does an awful lot of critical damage to apply high level shocks. These shocks are then converted to high damage using Lightning Conduit. We pulse this whenever we get to full stacks of orbs of Stormburst. On top of this, the pulse from Lightning Conduit causes our Stormburst to be interrupted. This makes all orbs explode for 75% of their remaining ticks. The skill ticks every 0.4 seconds, and we've scaled this up through duration to a whopping 3.2 seconds, which is 8 ticks. This causes a 6-time damage multiplier without us stacking anything else on top. Now Path of Building currently shows us doing about 3.2 million DPS, but this is based on having maximum stacks and not on having them all explode, dealing the remainder of their damage. This means that the burst potential of Storm Conduit will actually be much higher than Path of Building shows. And you'll see that from some of the upcoming footage as we chump down bosses. In addition to this, we also curse with conductivity on hit, have onslaught, generate power charges, cull enemies and inflict exposure. We top this off by standing in a sigil of power which has been buffed in duration to allow it to get to the highest levels. And we also do a staple of most lightning builds, which is converting some of that elemental damage into extra chaos damage. This makes the build all in all feel extremely strong. The mechanics of this build are fairly straightforward, but there are a fair number of buttons to press. That said, we don't have to press them very often. First of all, we need to deploy our sigil of power and roll out some brands. From then on we channel Stormburst for quite a while until we reach maximum orbs. At this point we hit Soul Conduit. This, as well as doing massive damage, causes all of our orbs to explode, dealing even further massive damage, causing massive chunks against our enemies, and one-shotting most packs. Now the sigil is supported by increased duration and so stays up for much longer than normal, and so we will reach maximum stacks, which means both defences and more damage. We should only recast the sigil when it completely expires, otherwise we'll reset its state and we'll lose damage. Between Stormburst detonations we do want to move around a fair bit using our movement skill to keep up Arcane Surge, but also to keep up Steel Skin. And occasionally we'll pop Enduring Cry to keep up our endurance charges, but also to give us a nice chunk of regen to our energy shield. Leveling the build is extremely straightforward. I do exactly what is depicted in my Shadow leveling guide. We switch over to Stormburst at Act 6 once we get access to Lily Roth. We help Alira in Act 2 for both the crit multi, mana regeneration, and resistances, all of which synergise extremely well with this build. I'll put a link to the Shadow leveling guide at the end of this video. Ascendancies. For our first Ascendancy we take one step ahead. This prevents our action speed from being lowered to 108% of normal. It also slows nearby enemies. Now this isn't quite as amazing as it first sounds, because there's an awful lot of things in this game that can still slow you without slowing your action speed, which is a bit stupid, but hey. That said, it's still great quality of life and I would definitely recommend using it. Secondly, we go Polymath, and due to the fact we have 10 unique category masteries, this means that we do a whopping 30% more damage, but also get 10% recovery of life, mana and energy shield whenever we kill, which is quite often. This is absolutely amazing for map survival, but also boss damage. Thirdly, we go Escape Artist, frankly because we have no other choice because it's en route to the final ascendancy, which is Spellbreaker, which we get in Uberlab. As well as granting 20% spell suppression, but also 10% extra mitigation to spell suppression. On top of this, it also has a really special feature, granting us 50% chance on spell suppression to restart our energy shield recharge. This is so good for survivability, and we should definitely go for it. Now, Escape Artist, as you can tell, isn't my first choice for Ascendancy. That said, we do manage to make use of it using our helmet, which must be an energy shield base, which we'll talk about in a little while. Core skills. For our main 6 link, we use Stormburst linked to Infused Channeling. This gives us some great damage and defences. And then we have Fist to Lightning to make sure that all of our physical is converted to lightning, and we also get a boost to lightning damage. Inspiration grants us critical chance and increases elemental damage, as well as reducing the mana cost of our 6 link, which is really good because mana on this build is extremely tight. And then when you add your 5th link, we can get increased duration. This makes all the orbs last longer, and therefore the explosion damage when they're interrupted is much greater. Although do make sure that as you increase the duration, you do it in steps of 0.4 seconds. Anything between that does nothing for you. And then finally we use increased critical damage, and this is because we can't use elemental focus because doing so would prevent us from using soul conduit, as we would no longer be able to shock. Okay, skill tree, keystones and masteries, oh my. This build has 4 keystones, which is quite a few. I think more than I've ever played before in a build. But they work really well together. We have Zealot's Oath for life regen converted to energy shield regen, which is very nice. Secondly, we use Wicked Ward. This prevents our energy shield from being interrupted if it started recently. Recently is the last 4 seconds. This synergizes extremely well with Spellbreaker, because this can give us a chance to restart our energy shield recharge, and this one prevents it from being interrupted, so we get a full 4 seconds of regen each time it kicks in. Now this is at the cost of slightly reduced energy shield recharge, but frankly that doesn't matter because energy shield recharge is so strong anyway. And thirdly, we go Chaos Inoculation because I've always wanted to play a build that only has a single life hit point. Just kidding. This build works extremely well with our chess piece, but also who doesn't want Chaos Immunity with all those Arch Nemesis mods running around? It's extremely good. And finally we go Ghost Stance because it's epic. The tree looks like this, and while it's moving around in the background, here are the Masteries. We want as many different categories of Masteries as we can get because this really scales our polymath damage, but also our polymath recovery. The Masteries I have are as follows. Under the Suppression Mastery we have critical strike chances increased by chance to suppress spell damage. That's a 100% increase. We then have the Energy Shield Mastery. Discipline has 25% increased mana reservation efficiency, and we also get regenerate 2% of energy shield per second. Leech Mastery, we go for 30% increased maximum total energy shield recovery per second from Leech. Under Critical Mastery we get 50% increased effective non-damaging ailment you inflict with critical strikes, and also you take 30% reduced extra damage from critical strikes, which is very nice. Lightning Mastery. Under this one we get lightning damage inflicted with non-critical strikes is lucky. That means it rolls the damage roll twice and gives you the highest one. Extremely useful. Mana Mastery, again mana on this build is extremely tight. We go for regenerate 5 mana per second while you have Arcane Surge. Caster Mastery, 1% increased spell damage for each 16 intelligence we have. And we have quite a lot of intelligence. Reservation Mastery grants 8% increased damage for each aura or herald affecting us, which is quite a few. Evasion Mastery, Grace has 25% increased mana reservation efficiency. And last but not least, Duration Mastery, which gives us 10% more skill effect duration and helps us just get over the edge. Okay, duels next. Currently I'm only using normal duels, prioritising energy shield, spell damage and lightning damage. Long term I'd like one of these to become a Watcher's Eye, with either increased lightning damage or lightning penetration when affected by Wrath, and percentage chance to evade attacks while we have Grace. These are quite expensive at between 4 and 5 divines, so I'm going to have to save up for one of those. But if you don't have the budget for it, you can skip it. I've been running all League this far without one. I'd just like to remind you that tickling the like button is completely free and helps those poor lonely like buttons around the world. It would mean a lot to them to tickle it, so please go ahead. And if you found this video useful or even mildly entertaining, then please consider clicking subscribe and clicking that little bell thing so you know the next time I publish. And moving swiftly on to the skill gems. Our first 4 link is Lightning Conduit linked to Inspiration, Elemental Focus and added lightning damage. Secondly we have Alchemist Brand linked to Wave of Conviction, Power Charge on Critical Strike and Culling Strike. This means that our brands that lie around on the floor until something walks past them suddenly jumps up at the enemy, throws out a Wave of Conviction, generates as a power charge and then culls them, which is all very nice. In our third 4 link, we go for Grace, Tempest Shield, Discipline and Enduring Cry. In our shield we go for Sigil of Power, Increased Duration and Steel Skin, and then our wand we have Flame Dash linked to Arcane Surge. We then have some skills that are all by themselves. One of which is Clarity. It's in the wand, but it has a broken link because I don't want it to get affected by Arcane Surge. And then Wrath, which I have in one of my rings, which is socketable. Map mods that we can't or shouldn't run. This build actually does extremely well with most map mods. The ones that we absolutely can't do are no leech, no recovery and reflect elemental damage. Pretty much everything else is okay. Obviously reduction to spell suppression you might want to avoid a little bit, but it really hasn't been a problem so far because of all the other layers of defences. On to the gear now, and let's go first to our weapon, which is a wand. On this, we want to focus on getting the following prefixes. Adds X to X lightning damage to spells. You want this as a higher tier as possible. As you can see, mine has a really high roll. Secondly, we want increased spell damage. As high as we can get, mine has over 100 increased spell damage. For our suffixes, we have a couple of choices. There's increased casting speed, crit chance, or crit multi. While levelling, I used Essence of Torment to keep that craft of X to X lightning damage to spells up to the highest level I could cope with. I would suggest you do the same because it's a great way for a really low price to keep the build constantly upgrading against the content you're facing. For our shield, which should be a dexterity or intelligence base, we want to go for the following prefixes. Flat energy shield and evasion, increased energy shield and evasion, and lightning damage as extra chaos. For our suffixes, we want to go spell suppression, chance to block, either spell damage or attack damage, and last but not least, we want to go for mana regeneration. This may seem like a waste of a slot, but mana is extremely tight because our skill uses a lot and we don't have an awful lot of it. The good news is you won't need this until you get onto a 6 link, so the early game doesn't require it. For our chest piece, we go for our first unique. This will set you back approximately 2 divines for a 6 link. It is of course the wonderful Incandescent Heart, which goes so well with Chaos Inoculation. The way this works to give us absolutely amazing defences is basically 25% of all incoming damage first gets converted to chaos damage, which we then throw away because we're immune to chaos. So 25% of all incoming elemental damage just vanishes. The next 75% gone through resistances, and if it's a spell, then 60% of that also gets thrown away too. Meaning we take so little elemental damage, it isn't funny. And that's why we really want to get as much conversion from physical incoming damage to elemental. It really is such an amazing thing to use with Chaos Knock. Now on top of this, it also gives us a fair amount of armour, which doesn't do an awful lot for us, but it's better than nothing. It also causes our light radius to go off energy shield instead of life, which is a major quality of life in the dungeons. We then get a rather nice percentage of our elemental damage that we deal converted into extra chaos, just scaling that damage up even further. On our helmet, we want to go for a pure intelligence base, and this is because we do want to have some synergy with Escape Artist because we have to take it. This basically gives us a certain amount of our energy shield of a helmet as extra evasion, which is always nice. On said helmet, we want the following prefixes: maximum energy shield, increased energy shield, and on our last prefix, ideally we want to take physical damage from hit converted to either chaos or elemental damage. If it's elemental, go lightning because that's our highest resistance. Now this does mean that you'll need to use a Conqueror Influence base. This is a bit beyond your price range. There is an Eater of World implicit that will give you, while unique enemy is in your presence, 9% of physical damage from hits taken as lightning damage. This is either a low cost alternative or a great addition to make your defences feel that much better. And from our suffixes, let's go for resistances. And this build also uses an awful lot of strength, so you might want to check that out too. And for a helmet enchants, I would either go for the Sigil of Power buff, also grants 30% increased critical strike chance per stage, giving us a whopping 120% increase at the 4th and final stage, or we can go for Stormburst, has 40% increased damage. Onto our rings now, and one of these should have the role Curse enemies with conductivity on hit with 20% increased effect. Now if you can't afford one of these early on, you can farm them from the delve, just look for the little lightning symbol over the room, and there's a good chance to find them in the crates in there. And for our other suffixes, we can go for either strength or dexterity, depending on which we need the most, probably strength, and also resistances. And then for prefixes, we go for the usual maximum energy shield, evasion, or increased AoE if you have a warlock base. For our boots, which we want to be either a dex or intelligence base, yes I know my boots fail, we want to go for flat evasion and increased evasion. We also want to go for our final prefix, increased movement speed and chance to gain onslaught on kill. Onslaught is really nice for giving us extra speed as we map. And for our suffixes, it's going to be no surprise, we want to go Strength and Resistances. For our Lab enchant on the boots, I've also gone 80% chance to avoid being stunned if you've killed recently. Also, the Searing Exarch has a chance of giving us the roll Avoid Being Stunned at 15%. This means that just off our boots alone, we have a 95% chance to avoid being stunned, which is huge for survivability. Now also, because we have Energy Shield, we also get a 50% chance to ignore a stun, which means if it does get through our first layer of defense, it could get stopped by our second. It's a really high chance not to be stunned. For our gloves, we want a Dex and Intelligence base, and ideally we want it to have Warlord's Influence. That said, that's not important, and I don't have it either. For our gloves rolls on prefixes, we want Flat Evasion, Increased Evasion, and if we have a Warlord Influence one, chance to gain Frenzy Charge on kill. This will give us increased attack and cast speed and movement speed, which is always nice. And for our suffixes, it's the usual, Strength and Resistances. Onto the belt now, and it has to be a crystal belt. We want the highest possible energy shield implicit we can get, and then for our prefixes we go for Energy Shield, Flasks applied to you have increased effect, and then if you were to have an Elder base you could go for increased global physical damage for your final prefix. And for suffixes, I'm not going to repeat it because it's exactly the same as every other piece of gear. Onto the Amulet now, and this is really expensive. We're gonna go for Ol's Uprising at 5 Divines, and we need the variant that has the roll Wrath Has No Reservation. This means that we can use the Wrath Aura for no mana, which is really good because it gives us over 500,000 DPS extra. Now this isn't essential, I have gone through most of the start of the league without one. Before it, the build felt good, after it, the build feels bloody amazing. If you can't afford this though, then go for a rare amulet that has +1 to level of all lightning skill gems, with Energy Shield, spell damage, and critical strike. And of course some resists if you need them on there. Now whilst we're still on the subject of the amulet, we obviously want to talk about the anointment, and for this one we go for Potency of Will. This will set you back 2 brown oils and an opalescent, so it's fairly cheap. What this gives us is 25% increased skill effect duration, which of course scales at the time on our Storm Burst, making it deal more damage when they actually detonate. Onto the Pantheons now, and for our Pantheon we want to get Soul of Arakali for the Major. This gives us great dot mitigation, and we do want to fully upgrade it apart from the roll that says Chaos Resist against dots. This is pointless because we're Chaos Immune. For our Minor Pantheon we go for Ralakesh. This gives us dot mitigation and also caps the number of Corrupted Bloods we can get at 5. Which is much better than double that at 10. On to the Flasks now, and these are pretty important. Our first Flask and most important is Taste of Hate. This takes physical damage from hits, converts them to cold, 25% of that gets moved to chaos and vanishes. It also gives us some nice physical damage as extra cold damage, which is always good. Remember that Storm Burst is a physical gem first converted to lightning, and therefore we get a nice chunk of damage off that. And secondly we go at Zeri's Promise for the elemental and physical damage to extra chaos damage, which is really good. Onto the utility flask now, of which we use 3. The first is a Jade Flask, which gives us evasion. The second is a Stibnite, which gives us increased evasion, but also creates a smoke cloud, which will blind things around us. And then Quicksilver, because we like moving a lot. Now on these flasks, and on any of them, we want to go for the following 3 mods. Immunity to bleed and corrupted blood, cast speed during flask effect, immunity to ignite during flask effect. And probably the best roll on each of these will be chance to gain flash charges on critical strike or increased duration. We're now in the final stretch of this build guide, and that's the conclusion. Is this build for you? If you're playing hardcore, then I wouldn't ever follow a build that I do because I'm terrible at hardcore and staying alive in general. If you're playing SSF and you've already dropped the chest, then go ahead. If you haven't dropped the chest, then you really do want this chest to play this build, so it could be problematic if you don't have it. This build is really fun to play. That said, it is not the fastest mapper in the world. And so if you like really fast zoom builds, this probably isn't for you. If you like killing bosses, however, then this build probably is for you because you can kill them fairly quickly and they, in some cases, can't do anything to you at all. The classic example is the Conqueror the Hunter. He actually can't touch you, you just stand in the middle of the arena and he literally just does nothing to you because you're Chaos Immune. It's really good fun. Now if you like defences, this build is absolutely amazing. It can stand in huge swathes of monsters without them even touching you. That said, it's an evasion build, and so there is that little gap in your evasion where if you get hit hard enough, you will die. So you will get hit to one-shots every so often. However, it's not very often. If you are looking to do this build, there will be a levelling guide up to the top left to help you. If you do have any questions, then please leave them in the comments below or join the Discord. And with that, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.